They threw accusation after accusation her way, treating her faith like something to be mocked. Her gentle smile never left as she responded, causing the entire studio audience to rise in support. She came to talk about her new album, but when the host tried to bait her into a political statement, Carrie Underwood's response left the entire studio speechless and had the audience on their feet cheering. The studio of Morning Beat with Alicia Kent glowed with the polished perfection that viewers had come to expect from America's highest-rated daytime talk show. Massive screens displayed the show's logo in vibrant blues and whites, creating a backdrop that suggested both warmth and unquestioned authority. The air hummed with the particular energy that only live television can generate, a mixture of anticipation, tension, and the subtle electricity of performance. Cameras glided silently across the floor, operated by crew members who moved with the practiced precision of those who had mastered invisibility. Their presence essential, yet unnoticed like the inner workings of a luxury watch. The studio audience settled into their seats, excitement rippling through the crowd. Many had waited months for tickets, standing in line since dawn, clutching coffee cups and cell phones, eager to witness the day's lineup, especially the appearance by seven-time Grammy winner, country music superstar Carrie Underwood. They checked their phones, whispered to companions, and responded to the warm-up comedian's prompts with practiced enthusiasm, unaware that they were about to witness something unplanned, unscripted, a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and shared millions of times in the hours and days to come. Behind the scenes, the energy was different, focused, streamlined, purposeful. Production assistants moved with quiet urgency, their headsets buzzing with constant communication, their expressions suggesting the controlled stress of people responsible for ensuring that spontaneity occurred exactly on schedule. No detail was left to chance. The temperature of the studio, the positioning of the furniture, the camera angles, the lighting, all carefully calibrated to create the illusion of casual conversation while maximizing control. In the control room, executive producer Daniel Hughes scanned the wall of monitors, his trained eye catching details that others might miss. A slight adjustment needed in camera 3, a lighting issue on the far side of the stage. The audience member in row 4, whose bright red shirt might distract from the carefully designed color palette, 22 years in television had given him an almost supernatural ability to anticipate problems before they emerged, to sense the subtle shifts in energy that could transform a segment from forgettable to viral. And today, he sensed something in the preparation, something in the atmosphere that suggested this particular interview might not follow the careful choreography they had designed. He glanced at his assistant Sandra, who was reviewing the pre-interview notes one last time before the segment. "Everything good to go?" She nodded without looking up. "Alicia wants to hit the political angle hard. She thinks we can get Carrie to comment on the Texas legislation." Hughes frowned slightly. "Careful," he said, his voice low enough that only Sandra could hear. "We don't want another Williams situation." They both remembered the fallout from pushing country star Tyler Williams too hard. The backlash from fans, the advertisers who had pulled spots, the network executives who had called emergency meetings to discuss the show's direction. Sandra shrugged slightly. "Alicia says this is different. She thinks Carrie's ready to speak out. She's just waiting for the right moment." Hughes wasn't convinced, but he knew better than to interfere with Alicia Kent's instincts that had transformed Morning Beat from a struggling mid-morning talk show into a ratings powerhouse, a platform where celebrities, politicians, and influencers knew their comments would drive the day's news cycle, for better or worse. In her dressing room, Alicia Kent made final adjustments to her appearance, though the adjustments were largely unnecessary. At 44, she projected the kind of polished perfection that came from years of careful cultivation. Her dark hair fell in precise waves, framing features that seemed designed for high-definition close-ups. Her navy blue dress, a perfect complement to the show's color scheme. A choice that was far from accidental. Everything about Alicia Kent was deliberate, from her carefully calibrated smile, which suggested warmth without vulnerability, to the practiced head tilt that conveyed interest without concession. She had risen through the ranks of television with methodical determination, crafting a persona that appealed to a broad audience while still generating the moments of conflict that drove engagement in the digital age. A production assistant knocked softly on the door. "5 minutes, Ms. Kent." Alicia nodded without turning around, her eyes still fixed on her reflection as she mentally reviewed the approach she had planned for today's interview. Carrie Underwood was different from her usual guests, more careful, more controlled, less likely to be provoked into the kind of statement that would generate headlines. But every guest had a pressure point, a way in, a moment when the public persona might crack just enough to reveal something authentic, something newsworthy. Alicia Kent had built her career on finding those pressure points and pressing with elegant precision until the moment emerged. "I need her reaction on camera," she murmured to herself, her expression hardening just slightly. "The first time the world sees Carrie Underwood take a real political stand, it needs to be on my show." Down the hall in a separate dressing room, Carrie Underwood sat quietly, reviewing the notes for her performance, the set list for the 2 songs she would perform to promote her new album, Heartland Horizons. At 39, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. 8 multi-platinum albums, 27 #1 singles, a successful clothing line, and a happy family life had given her a security that couldn't be shaken by a single interview, no matter how probing. Her appearance was polished but not manufactured, elegant but approachable, a balance she had perfected over years in the public eye. Unlike many celebrities who use stylists to craft every aspect of their public image, there was something authentic about Carrie, something that her fans recognized and responded to, a groundedness that had kept her connected to her roots even as her star rose. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A production assistant peeked in. "They're ready for your sound check, Ms. Underwood." Carrie smiled warmly. "Thank you. I'll be right there." As she stood, gathering her things, she caught sight of one of the monitors in her dressing room, displaying a feed from the main set where Alicia Kent was speaking with a producer. They were too far away for Carrie to hear, but something in their expression, their body language, triggered a familiar sense of caution. She had been in the industry long enough to recognize when an interviewer had an agenda beyond the stated purpose of promoting her new music. She had sensed it during the pre-interview, in the carefully casual questions about her thoughts on recent events, in the subtle attempts to gauge her willingness to wade into controversial waters. Carrie sighed softly. "They always want the moment," she thought to herself. The headline, the clip, the controversy that would drive traffic, generate engagement. But that wasn't why she made music. It wasn't what her fans expected from her. And it wasn't what she intended to provide, no matter how skillfully Alicia Kent might try to guide her in that direction. As she walked toward the stage, Carrie mentally prepared herself, not just for the performance of her new single, but for the other performance, the careful navigation of leading questions, the gentle redirections, the maintenance of boundaries she had established years ago about what parts of herself belonged to the public and what remained private. What she couldn't have anticipated was how this particular interview would deviate from the script, how Alicia Kent's determination to create a viral moment would backfire so spectacularly and so publicly, or how Carrie's response would resonate with millions of viewers tired of the performative politics that had infected every aspect of American culture. Even their morning entertainment, what was about to unfold, wasn't in anyone's production notes, wasn't planned or rehearsed, but would become one of the most discussed television moments of the year, a rare instance of authentic truth, breaking through the carefully constructed artifice of daytime television. The studio glittered under carefully positioned lights, a technological cathedral dedicated to the gods of ratings and viral moments. Massive cameras moved with silent precision, their operators barely visible in the shadows like priests tending to sacred machinery. The air itself seemed different in this space, cooler, cleaner, somehow electrified with the particular energy that exists only where performance meets power. The audience seats formed a semicircle around the central stage where 2 elegant armchairs waited, angled toward each other at precisely 45 degrees, a deliberate choice that created both intimacy and contrast. A small table between them held 2 pristine water glasses, no condensation, no fingerprints, nothing that suggested human imperfection. Massive screens lined the walls displaying the Morning Beat logo, pulsing subtly like a digital heartbeat. The background, a carefully designed gradient of blues and silvers, suggesting trust, stability, authority, without stating it directly. The visual language of influence. Floor managers moved efficiently among the seats, making last-minute adjustments to the audience asking one person to shift slightly to the left, guiding another to a different seat entirely, ensuring that when the cameras panned, the crowd would appear perfectly diverse, perfectly engaged, perfectly authentic in its manufactured enthusiasm. A warm-up comedian worked the room, his practiced banter creating the illusion of spontaneous joy, his instructions disguised as casual suggestions. Laugh a little louder at this, applaud a little longer at that. The audience members responded eagerly, happy to be part of the performance, to temporarily step inside the screen that usually separated them from this world of polished perfection. In the wings, stagehands adjusted equipment. Sound technicians checked microphone levels. Makeup artists waited with powder brushes, ready to eliminate any hint of humanity that might appear on camera. A shine of perspiration, a strand of hair, anything that might disrupt the careful illusion of effortless perfection. The production assistant's voice came through every headset simultaneously. 15 minutes to air, places everyone. The announcement sent a ripple of movement through the backstage area, a subtle acceleration of activity as the machine prepared to activate. In the green room, Carrie Underwood sat quietly watching the monitor that displayed the studio feed, studying the environment she was about to enter, not with anxiety, but with awareness, the practiced assessment of a veteran performer who had navigated these waters many times before. Her band members chatted nearby, relaxed, comfortable, familiar with the routine of television appearances, the hurry up and wait, the technical requirements, the compressed performances that reduce their usual concert energy into television-friendly segments. Unlike them, Carrie's focus wasn't on the performance. She could sing her songs in her sleep, had performed them in venues far more demanding than a morning talk show studio. Her attention was on the interview, on the subtle cues she had detected during the pre-interview that morning, the producer's particular interest in her thoughts on current events, the casual mentions of other artists who had recently taken political stands, the questions that seemed designed to map her potential pressure points. A production assistant appeared at the door. "They're ready for your sound check, Ms. Underwood." Carrie nodded, rising smoothly, her movement graceful, unhurried. She followed the assistant through a maze of cables and equipment, past staff members who barely looked up from their clipboards and tablets, each focused on their specific role in the complex choreography of live television. On stage, the sound engineers waited, adjusting levels as Carrie took her position. The stage manager nodded toward the microphone. "Whenever you're ready." Carrie sang a brief section of her new single, her voice filling the space with effortless power. A few audience members who had already been seated broke into spontaneous applause, their reaction genuine, uncoached, a contrast to the guided responses that would characterize the actual show. The sound engineer gave a thumbs up. "Perfect, we're all set." Carrie stepped back, allowing the band to complete their checks, then moved toward the interview area where a makeup artist waited to make final adjustments, though little was needed across the studio. Alicia Kent emerged from the tunnel that connected her dressing room to the stage, her entrance precisely timed to create the maximum impression without appearing staged. She moved with practiced confidence, smiling at crew members, greeting the front row of the audience with brief touches and warm words, creating the impression of accessibility while maintaining careful distance. When she spotted Carrie, her smile widened, the expression reaching her eyes with professional precision. "Carrie, darling," she called out, her voice carrying just enough to be heard without appearing to project. She moved across the stage, embracing Carrie with the perfect balance of warmth and respect. Air kisses that never disturbed makeup, a touch on the arm that suggested intimacy without crossing boundaries. The cameras weren't rolling yet, but the performance had already begun, both women skilled practitioners of the art of public persona, though practicing very different styles. "So excited to have you back on the show," Alicia said, maintaining eye contact for exactly the right amount of time to suggest sincerity without intensity. "It's been too long. Happy to be here," Carrie responded, her smile genuine but measured, her posture relaxed but poised, containing the awareness that, in spaces like this, even off-camera moments often had unseen audiences. Production assistants, crew members, executives, all watching, evaluating, forming impressions that might influence how the actual interview unfolded. The executive producer approached, clipboard in hand, headset firmly in place, his expression suggesting the controlled stress of someone responsible for countless moving parts. We're going to start with the interview segment, he explained, then performance right after. We've allocated 8 minutes for the conversation. Any questions? Both women shook their heads, veterans of the format, familiar with the constraints, the artificial time blocks that chopped human interaction into digestible segments separated by commercials. The floor manager's voice cut through the ambient noise. 5 minutes, everyone to your places, please. The announcement accelerated the already brisk pace. Audience members settled into their seats, putting away phones, straightening posture. Camera operators made final adjustments. Sound technicians confirmed levels, the machine preparing to activate. Alicia took her position in one of the armchairs, accepting a few last touches from the makeup artist. Reviewing note cards, though, she barely needed them. Having memorized the questions, the angles, the potential paths this conversation might take depending on Carrie's responses, Carrie moved toward the other chair, her steps unhurried, her expression pleasant, giving no indication that she had noticed the subtle signals throughout the morning, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the production notes visible on tablets that mentioned political angle and reaction shot. She had seen this before, the careful setup, the engineered spontaneity, the traps disguised as casual questions. She sat smoothly, arranging herself with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 2 decades in front of cameras. The floor manager raised his hand, fingers counting down silently. 5, 4, 3. The final numbers communicated without sound, just fingers folding inward one by one, the red lights on the cameras illuminated. The audience applauded on cue, their enthusiasm guided by the applause signs that flashed above the stage, and Alicia Kent transformed, her posture straightening, her smile widening, her entire being seeming to brighten under the studio lights. "Good morning, America," she began, her voice the perfect blend of energy and intimacy, the voice of a close friend who happened to be speaking to millions. "I'm Alicia Kent, and this is Morning Beat. We've got an incredible show for you today." She turned slightly toward Carrie, her expression suggesting genuine excitement. "And I'm thrilled to welcome back to our stage the incomparable Carrie Underwood." The audience applauded again, responding to both the flashing sign and their genuine enthusiasm for the country music superstar. Carrie smiled, acknowledging the welcome with a small wave, her expression warm but containing a hint of reserve that most viewers wouldn't notice. But Alicia Kent wasn't most viewers. She was a professional, a specialist in detecting the subtle signals that indicated a guest's state of mind, their openness, their potential resistance to her planned direction. And something in Carrie's composed demeanor suggested this interview might require more skillful navigation than anticipated. But navigation was Alicia's specialty, finding the path to the moment the show needed, the viral clip, the headline, the controversy that would drive engagement across platforms. The cameras adjusted, capturing both women in frame, creating the visual suggestion of intimacy, of authentic conversation, though both understood the artificial nature of the exchange they were about to have. The game was beginning, the pieces in position, the strategy about to unfold. But only one of them knew that the expected outcome was about to be disrupted, that the carefully planned path would lead somewhere neither anticipated, a moment that would reveal more truth than morning television usually allowed. Alicia Kent had mastered the art of the interview. 2 decades in television had taught her exactly how to navigate any conversation, how to guide guests where she wanted them to go, while making them believe they had led the way themselves. At 44, she had reached the pinnacle of morning television. Her show, Morning Beat, consistently dominated ratings. Her name had become shorthand for a certain kind of polished incisiveness that viewers found addictive. Celebrities sought her approval. Politicians prepared extensively before appearing. Executives trembled slightly when she turned her attention to corporate missteps. Her journey to this position had been calculated, deliberate, each step planned with precision. From local news in Cincinnati to network correspondent covering politics to featured commentator on Sunday shows, to finally landing her own daily platform where she could shape cultural conversations rather than merely report on them. She had sacrificed for this success. 2 marriages that couldn't withstand the relentless ambition that drove her, friendships that faded as she climbed, a personal life subordinated entirely to professional advancement. The corner office at network headquarters, the Manhattan apartment with views of Central Park, the vacation home in the Hamptons, the carefully curated social media presence, all of it constructed to project an image of effortless success achieved on merit alone. Though those who worked closely with her knew the relentless work, the ruthless decisions, the strategic alliances that had actually built her empire, what viewers saw was the finished product. The elegant woman with perfect diction who could pivot from celebrity gossip to geopolitics without missing a beat, who asked the questions others wouldn't dare, who created the moments that dominated news cycles and social media feeds. That polished image sat now in the interview chair, her posture perfect, her smile precisely calibrated to suggest warmth without vulnerability, her navy dress chosen specifically to convey authority while still appearing approachable, every detail considered, every element intentional, the performance so practiced it appeared natural, though nothing about it was. Carrie Underwood offered a study in contrast, her success equally impressive but carried differently. Where Alicia projected ambition, Carrie emanated authenticity, the kind of genuine presence that couldn't be manufactured or coached. At 39, she had achieved everything the music industry could offer: multi-platinum albums, sold-out stadium tours, Grammy Awards, Academy of Country Music honors, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But she wore these accomplishments lightly. Her success seemed almost incidental to who she was rather than defining her. Her journey had begun on American Idol, a farm girl from Oklahoma, with a powerful voice and natural charm that resonated with millions of viewers who voted week after week to keep her on their screens. In the years since she had navigated fame with a graceful steadiness that set her apart in an industry known for manufacturing, then destroying its young stars, she had avoided the public meltdowns, the controversial statements, the erratic behavior that typically generated headlines, instead building a career marked by consistency, professionalism, and a clear-eyed understanding of the boundaries between her public persona and her private self. Her marriage to former NHL player Mike Fisher, her 2 sons, her Christian faith, her commitment to animal welfare and fitness all existed in careful balance, neither hidden from public view nor exploited for publicity. She shared what felt comfortable, authentic, and protected the rest with quiet determination. Unlike many celebrities who used stylists to craft every public statement, every social media post, every interview response, Carrie maintained a naturalness that fans recognized and responded to. She sat now in the interview chair, her posture relaxed but poised, her smile genuine, not performed, her cream-colored blazer and jeans suggesting a casual elegance that contrasted with Alicia's more formal presentation. The difference between them extended beyond their attire, their posture, their expression. It was a fundamental contrast in approach to public life itself. Alicia had built a career on provocation, on generating moments that sparked controversy, divided audiences, created engagement. Carrie had built hers on connection, on music that resonated across divisions, on a persona that invited identification rather than debate. These differences were not lost on the production team, who had prepared extensively for this interview, anticipating the challenge of generating the kind of moment Morning Beat thrived on from a guest known for thoughtful navigation of potentially controversial topics. In the control room, executive producer Daniel Hughes watched the monitors intently, noting the subtle signals already visible in the body language of both women. Alicia leaning forward slightly, her posture suggesting the predatory focus of someone preparing to strike. Carrie settled comfortably, her hands relaxed, her expression open, but containing a hint of awareness, a quiet readiness that most might miss, but Hughes recognized from years of studying interview subjects. He knows what we're planning, he thought, but knowing and avoiding were different matters. Even the most media-savvy guests eventually responded to Alicia's skillful pressure. Her ability to find the precise point where composure cracked, where preparation failed, where the authentic reaction emerged whether they intended it or not. On set, the camera operators adjusted their focus, capturing both women in frame. One lens zoomed slightly closer on Carrie's face, ready to catch the micro-expressions that might reveal her true reactions to the questions about to come. The audience settled, a collective entity primed by the warm-up comedian to respond on cue, to laugh, applaud, gasp at the appropriate moments, their energy adding to the atmosphere of anticipation, expectation, pressure. Alicia began with practiced warmth, her voice taking on the intimate tone she reserved for the opening minutes of high-profile interviews. "Carrie, it's so wonderful to have you back," she said, her smile suggesting genuine pleasure, though her eyes remained sharply focused, evaluating, scanning for weaknesses. "The new album, Heartland Horizons, is your 8th studio release, and critics are already calling it one of your most personal works yet." Carrie nodded, her smile authentic, reflecting genuine pride in the project. "It really is," she responded, her Oklahoma accent still present but softened by years in Nashville. "I took more time with this one, was more involved in the writing process, really wanted to create something that reflected where I am in my life right now." The response was warm, engaging, professional, exactly what would be expected from a veteran performer promoting new work. But Alicia had no intention of conducting an expected interview. She nodded encouragingly, maintaining the appearance of interest while already calculating the pivot that would move the conversation toward more contentious territory. "The album's title seems particularly meaningful," she continued. "In the current climate, heartland values have become such a politically charged concept." Her emphasis on the word politically was subtle but deliberate, the first move in the game she intended to play, an opening so seemingly casual that objecting would appear defensive, paranoid even. But Carrie caught it immediately, the slight shift in Alicia's tone, the calculated introduction of terminology that opened a path to the territory where Morning Beat clearly wanted to lead her. She had seen this technique before, the innocuous framing that created a foundation for more pointed questions, the context that made declining to engage seem like an admission or evasion. Her expression remained pleasant, unchanged, giving no indication that she had recognized the strategy being deployed. "It's about roots and horizons," she replied smoothly, looking backward and forward simultaneously, honoring where you're from while still growing, evolving, moving forward. The response was thoughtful, substantive, addressing the question directly while skillfully sidestepping the political framing that had been offered. In the control room, Hughes noted the maneuver with professional appreciation. "She's good," he murmured, more to himself than to his assistant. "Very good." Alicia recognized it too, the gentle redirect, the maintenance of boundaries without explicit acknowledgement that boundaries were being tested. Less experienced interviewers might have been discouraged, might have retreated to safer questions about songwriting processes or tour plans. But Alicia Kent hadn't built her reputation by accepting the first deflection, or even the fifth. She adjusted mentally, recalibrating her approach for a guest who clearly understood the game being played. The studio lights cast a flattering glow on both women, creating the visual harmony that suggested authentic conversation while disguising the subtle tension that now existed between them. Alicia's smile remained warm, unchanged, her posture still suggesting engaged interest, but her eyes had taken on a sharper focus, the gaze of a tactician reassessing strategy. The moment had become a chess match between two skilled players, one seeking exposure, revelation, conflict, the other maintaining authenticity without confrontation. The audience watched, unaware of the subtle dynamics, the careful calculations, the strategic positioning, seeing only two successful women having what appeared to be a friendly conversation. But the production team recognized what was happening, their attention, intensifying as they waited to see which would prevail, Alicia's relentless pursuit of a viral moment, or Carrie's graceful navigation of the traps being set. The contrast between them had never been more apparent, though it remained invisible to casual observation, a difference not just in style or approach, but in fundamental understanding of what their public platforms were for and what responsibilities came with them, a contrast that would become increasingly evident as the interview continued, its carefully orchestrated progress toward the collision that only one of them was seeking. Alicia Kent shifted slightly in her chair, repositioning herself for the next phase of the conversation she had carefully planned, her movements subtle, almost imperceptible, but containing the precision of a martial artist preparing to strike from a new angle. "You've always maintained a certain privacy," she continued, her tone conversational, a careful balance of warmth and persistence, in an industry where many artists share every aspect of their personal lives. Her hands clasped loosely in her lap, the picture of relaxed attention, though nothing about Alicia Kent was ever truly relaxed. Every gesture, word, expression calculated for maximum effect. Carrie nodded, acknowledging the observation without immediately responding, a technique she had learned over years of navigating interviews designed to extract more than she intended to give. The slight pause created space, forced Alicia to continue her thought rather than allowing her to react to whatever Carrie might say. "It's become increasingly difficult, though," Alicia added, filling the silence, "as the lines between entertainment and politics continue to blur. We've seen so many artists recently feeling compelled to speak out on issues from reproductive rights to election integrity." She let the examples hang in the air. Specific choices, not random selections. Topics carefully picked for their divisive nature. Their ability to generate strong reactions regardless of the position taken. In the control room, Daniel Hughes leaned forward, his eyes locked on the monitors, watching Carrie's expression for any change. Any micro-reaction that might indicate they were approaching a pressure point, a subject that might provoke the unguarded response they had been pursuing since booking this interview. But Carrie's expression remained pleasant, open, betraying nothing beyond thoughtful attention to the question being presented. "She's not giving us anything," Hughes murmured. His assistant nodded, her eyes equally focused on the screens before them. "Alicia's good, but she might be better." Backstage, a small group had gathered around the production monitors, assistants, writers, segment producers, all watching with professional interest, as one of television's most skilled interviewers attempted to maneuver one of music's most media-savvy artists into uncharted territory. It was like watching a high-level chess match, moves, counters, subtle positioning, invisible to casual observers, but fascinating to those who understood the dynamics at play. On set, Carrie considered her response, not with anxiety or defensiveness, but with the calm assessment of someone who had anticipated this direction and prepared accordingly. She thought briefly of the conversation she'd had with her publicist that morning, the warning that Morning Beat was likely fishing for political content, given the show's recent pivot toward more controversial segments. She thought, too, of the advice her mentor Reba McEntire had given her years earlier when she was just starting out. "Never let them make you something you're not," Reba had told her during a tour bus conversation. "They'll try, they'll try, but the moment you become what they want instead of who you are, that's when you lose the connection with the people who matter most." That advice had shaped Carrie's approach to public life, guiding her navigation of an industry that constantly pressured artists to be more revealing, more controversial, more exploitable for ratings and clicks and views. "I think every artist has to find their own path," she replied finally, her voice maintaining its warm, conversational tone. "Some feel called to use their platform for specific political advocacy. And I respect that choice." She paused, allowing the acknowledgement to register before continuing. "I've always believed that music itself is where I can contribute most meaningfully, bringing people together rather than focusing on what divides us." The response was thoughtful, measured, neither condemning artists who made different choices nor providing the political declaration that Alicia was clearly seeking. In the control room, Hughes frowned. "She's redirecting again," he said, his tone suggesting both frustration and professional respect. "We need to be more direct." He spoke quietly into his headset, communicating with Alicia's earpiece. "Push harder on the Texas legislation angle, see if we can get a reaction." On set, Alicia received the message, the slight touch to her ear the only indication that communication had occurred, the gesture so practiced it appeared to be nothing more than brushing back a strand of hair. She nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the direction without breaking the conversational flow. "But that separation seems increasingly difficult to maintain," she pressed, her tone shifting slightly, taking on the extra layer of seriousness she reserved for what she considered substantive discussion. "Just last month, we saw Taylor Swift making headlines for speaking out about voting rights, Pink addressing women's health care, even Beyoncé endorsing candidates. Her examples weren't random, each calculated to represent artists who had taken public positions, who had stepped into precisely the territory where Morning Beat was trying to lead Carrie, the implication clear that silence itself was becoming a statement, a choice that required justification. The camera operators adjusted focus, one zooming slightly closer on Carrie's face, ready to capture any change in expression. Any hint of discomfort or defensiveness that might provide the reaction shot the show needed for promotional clips. The audience sat forward slightly, sensing the subtle shift in energy, the increasing focus as the conversation moved toward potentially contentious territory. The studio itself seemed to tighten, the air charging with anticipation, as everyone present recognized on some level that the performative pleasantries were giving way to the real purpose of this carefully orchestrated exchange. Carrie took a small sip of water, the action giving her a moment to consider not what to say, but precisely how to say it, how to respond authentically without allowing herself to be maneuvered into the position that had been prepared for her. "They're all incredible artists," she said, setting the glass down carefully, "and they've each made choices that feel authentic to their journey." The response acknowledged the examples without engaging the implied pressure that she should be doing the same. But Alicia wasn't finished, wasn't even close to finished. "Your fans span the political spectrum," she continued, leaning forward slightly, her body language suggesting increased intensity. "Your concerts fill stadiums in blue states and red states. How do you navigate knowing that your audience holds such conflicting views on these fundamental issues?" The question was cleverly constructed, framing political declaration as a form of respect for the audience, implying that neutrality itself was a form of disrespect or disengagement rather than a conscious choice. The trap was set, the path laid out. Answer one way and appear to disregard fans on one side of the political divide. Answer another and alienate the opposite group. Remain neutral and appear calculating, evasive. It was the kind of question Alicia Kent had built her reputation on. Questions that offered no safe path forward, only different forms of the revelation she was seeking. In the control room, Hughes nodded with approval. "Now we're getting somewhere," he said, his eyes fixed on the monitors, watching for the first signs of discomfort, the uncertainty, the brief crack in composure that would indicate they were breaking through. But what he saw instead was something unexpected, not anxiety, not defensiveness, but a subtle shift in Carrie's expression, a quiet certainty that suggested she had been waiting for precisely this moment, had prepared for it, had perhaps even welcomed the opportunity it presented. Not to deliver the political statement they were fishing for, but something else entirely, something they hadn't anticipated in their careful planning of this segment. The floor manager noted it too, the slight change in the studio's energy, the sense that the conversation was about to turn in a direction no one had scripted. He signaled to the camera operators, ensuring they were positioned to capture whatever was about to unfold. The audience sensed it as well, a collective leaning forward, a quieting of the small movements and whispers that typically filled the spaces between questions and answers. Even Alicia felt it, the subtle shift in the dynamic between them, her experienced instincts warning her that despite her skillful positioning, despite the carefully constructed question, despite the apparent lack of escape routes, she might not be leading this exchange in the direction she had intended. The realization was so contrary to her usual experience of these interviews that it took her briefly by surprise, a momentary uncertainty flickering across her features too quickly for viewers to notice, but long, enough for Carrie to recognize, and in that recognition to find confirmation that the moment had arrived, the moment to address not the political question that had been asked, but the underlying approach that had shaped this entire segment, the moment to respond, not as the character Morning Beat had tried to create, but as herself, with all the authenticity that had defined her career, and with a clarity that would leave not just Alicia, but the entire studio entirely unprepared for what came next. Carrie's smile remained genuine, but something shifted in her eyes, a subtle focusing, a quiet certainty that suggested careful consideration rather than the defensive reaction that Alicia had been trying to provoke. "That's a thoughtful question, Alicia," she began, her voice still warm, still measured, but carrying a new clarity, a directness that immediately changed the energy between them. "I think what you're really asking is why I haven't made my political positions a central part of my public identity." The observation was accurate, precise, cutting directly to the purpose behind the carefully framed question, acknowledging the strategy without condemning it. Alicia blinked just briefly enough that most viewers wouldn't notice, but in the control room, Hughes did, his experienced eye catching the momentary break in her practiced composure. "She's turning it around," he murmured, more to himself than his assistant. "This isn't where we wanted to go." On set, Alicia recovered quickly, her professionalism reasserting itself in the almost imperceptible adjustment of her posture, the recalibration of her expression. Many artists feel a responsibility, she redirected, her tone taking on the authoritative quality she employed when establishing the framework for conversations she intended to control. To use their platform to advocate for causes they believe in, particularly in these divisive times. The attempt to re-establish the narrative was skillful, practiced, the technique that had worked with countless guests before, steering them back to the path she had designed, regardless of their attempts to choose a different direction. But Carrie didn't respond to the redirect, didn't allow herself to be maneuvered back into the framing that had been prepared. "I believe music itself is powerful," she said, her Oklahoma accent becoming slightly more pronounced, as it often did when she spoke from genuine conviction rather than managed talking points. "It brings people together across the divisions that seem to dominate everything else." The camera operators adjusted focus, capturing her expression, as it shifted from the pleasant neutrality of promotion to something more authentic, more personal. "I look out at my concerts and see people who disagree on politics, on religion, on just about everything that fills the news," she continued, her hands opening slightly in a gesture that encompassed the imagined audience. "But they're singing the same lyrics, feeling the same emotions, sharing an experience that transcends those differences. And there's something beautiful in that, something worth protecting." The response was thoughtful, substantive, engaging with the underlying question while refusing the divisive framing that had been offered. Alicia sensed the shift in direction, recognized that the conversation was moving away from the confrontational moment the show had been trying to engineer, but rather than retreat, she pressed harder, her professional instincts telling her that increased pressure might still produce the reaction they needed. "But surely you have opinions," she challenged, her tone taking on the slight edge of skepticism she reserved for answers she considered evasive. "On issues that affect your fans directly, the restrictive legislation in Texas, the ongoing debates about gun control, the Supreme Court decisions." The list wasn't random, the topics chosen specifically for their emotional weight, their ability to provoke strong reactions regardless of the position taken. In the control room, Hughes leaned forward, eyes fixed on the monitors, watching for any change in Carrie's expression, any micro-reaction that might suggest they had found a pressure point, a topic that might break through her composed exterior. The floor manager signaled to the audience, a subtle reminder to remain quiet, attentive, no matter what direction the conversation took, recognizing that something unexpected was unfolding, something that required perfect capture. The studio lights seemed to intensify, casting both women in sharp relief, creating visual drama that matched the tension now building between them. Carrie took a breath, not from anxiety, but from the centering practice she had developed over years of public life, a moment to ensure that her response came from authentic conviction rather than reactive emotion. "Of course I have opinions," she acknowledged, her voice still even, still conversational, despite the increased pressure. "I vote, I follow the news, I care deeply about the world my children will inherit." She paused, allowing the acknowledgement to register before continuing. "But I've made a conscious choice about how I use the platform I've been given, a choice that feels authentic to who I am and what I believe my music is meant to do." The camera caught Alicia's expression, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the barely perceptible tightening of her jaw, tells that viewers might not consciously register, but that communicated her growing frustration at a guest who understood the game being played and refused to follow its rules. "Some might say that silence is itself a political choice," Alicia pressed, her tone now openly challenging. "That not speaking out on these issues is a form of privilege." The accusation was direct, unmistakable, designed to provoke defensiveness, to create the emotionally charged moment that would generate headlines and clips, the kind of exchange that drove ratings and social media engagement. The trap was set, the bait offered, the cameras positioned to capture the defensive response, the indignation, the moment when composure might crack, revealing the reaction they had been pursuing since the segment began. In the control room, Hughes held his breath, sensing they were approaching the breaking point they had been seeking, the moment when even the most media-savvy guest might respond from emotion rather than calculation, creating the viral clip they needed. But Carrie didn't react with defensiveness, didn't take the bait, didn't engage with the accusatory framing that had been presented. Instead, she nodded slightly as if considering the perspective with genuine interest rather than receiving it as an attack. "That's a perspective I've heard," she said, her voice maintaining its thoughtful, measured quality. "And I understand where it comes from." Her response acknowledged the criticism without becoming defensive about it, a technique that immediately disarmed its provocative intent. "But I wonder," she continued, "if we've created a culture where performative statements have become more valued than meaningful action." The observation shifted the conversation entirely, moving from the specific political topics Alicia had been pursuing to a meta-commentary on public discourse itself, challenging not Alicia's question, but the entire framework that shaped it. "I've always believed," she added, "that how I live my values, how I treat people, the charitable work I do privately, matters more than what I say publicly, particularly when public statements often seem designed more for headlines than for actual impact." The response wasn't angry, wasn't defensive, but it contained a clarity, a conviction that was impossible to dismiss or deflect, challenging the premise underlying the entire interview without ever directly criticizing the interviewer. In the control room, Hughes exhaled slowly, recognizing what was happening. "She's not just avoiding the trap," he said. "She's exposing it." His assistant nodded, her eyes fixed on the monitors. "Without ever making it personal, it's kinda brilliant." On set, Alicia recognized the shift as well, felt the conversation slipping further from the confrontational moment they had planned, felt the need to reassert control, to redirect, to find another angle that might still produce the viral clip they needed. "But public figures have a unique responsibility," she countered, her tone taking on the moral certainty she employed when establishing ethical frameworks, "to use their voice for those who may not be heard, to advocate for change when they have the platform to influence public opinion." The redirection was skillful, practiced, a pivot to moral obligation when the political angle had failed, placing Carrie in the position of either accepting the implied responsibility or appearing to reject a fundamental ethical duty. The studio audience watched intently, sensing the back and forth, the subtle struggle for control of the conversation's direction, even if they couldn't articulate the dynamics at play. The cameras captured both women in frame, creating visual balance while the audio picked up the increasing tension in Alicia's questions, the unchanged calm in Carrie's responses, the contrast growing more evident with each exchange. Carrie smiled, the expression genuine, not the practiced smile of media training, but the authentic response of someone who recognized the maneuver and appreciated its strategic deployment even as she declined to follow it. "I believe every person has to determine for themselves what responsibility means," she replied, her gaze direct, steady. "What form of contribution feels most authentic, most aligned with their values and abilities? For some, that's public advocacy. For others, it's private action. For me, it's creating music that brings people together rather than reinforcing what drives them apart." The response was thoughtful, substantive, engaging with the question while once again redirecting from the confrontational frame that had been offered. Carrie maintained her composed exterior, but her mind had traveled elsewhere, no longer fully present in the gleaming studio, with its perfect lighting and strategic camera angles. Instead, she found herself thinking of a conversation from nearly 15 years earlier, when her career was just beginning to soar, when the full weight of fame and its expectations were still new, still disorienting in their intensity. She had been sitting in a quiet corner of Reba McEntire's tour bus, the older woman's presence a steadying force in the chaotic whirlwind that Carrie's life had become since winning American Idol and being thrust into the spotlight. "They'll try to make you choose sides," Reba had told her that night, her voice carrying the quiet wisdom of someone who had navigated these waters for decades before her. "They'll try to turn you into a symbol instead of a person, a means to their end instead of an artist with your own purpose." Carrie remembered nodding, feeling overwhelmed by the pressure already building around her, the expectations, the scrutiny, the constant push to be more revealing, more controversial, more usable for someone else's agenda. "How do you resist that?" she had asked, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt, the fear that the industry might consume the person she actually was, replacing her with the marketable image they wanted her to become. Reba's answer had been simple but profound. "You remember why you sing," she had said, her eyes holding Carrie's with gentle intensity. "You remember who you sing for, and you never let anyone convince you that your value is in being divisive rather than bringing people together." That advice had shaped Carrie's approach to public life, becoming a touchstone she returned to whenever the pressure mounted, whenever interviews like this one tried to push her toward territory that felt inauthentic to her core values. Her mind shifted to another memory, more recent, more personal, standing backstage at a concert in Dallas, watching as families filed into the arena, parents with children, teenagers with grandparents, people from every background, every belief system, every political persuasion, united for those few hours by nothing more than a shared love for the music she created. A woman had approached her that night, middle-aged, eyes tired but kind, asking for an autograph for her daughter. As Carrie signed the concert program, the woman had leaned closer, her voice low, meant just for Carrie's ears. "My sister and I haven't spoken in 3 years," she had said. "Political differences. But tonight she brought her kids and we're sitting together. Your music was the only thing we could still agree on." The memory remained vivid, the woman's eyes, the slight tremble in her voice, the profound simplicity of what she was describing. Music creating a bridge where nothing else could. A moment of connection in a landscape increasingly defined by division. It was for moments like these that Carrie had maintained her careful approach to public life, refusing to become another voice shouting into the void of political discourse, choosing instead to create spaces where division might temporarily be suspended, where common ground could still be found, even if only for the length of a concert or the duration of a song. As Alicia's question hung in the air between them, loaded with implicit accusations designed to provoke a defensive response, Carrie thought too of her own children, of the world they were inheriting, a world where nuance was increasingly rare, where complex issues were reduced to simplistic binary positions, where the loudest voices dominated conversation, regardless of what they actually had to say. She thought of what she wanted to teach them, about standing firm in their own values while still respecting the humanity of those who reached different conclusions, about the courage required to resist pressure, to speak thoughtfully rather than reactively, to maintain boundaries without building walls. Her mind briefly touched on the country itself, the deepening divides, the hardening positions, the growing inability to see those on the other side as anything but enemies to be defeated, rather than fellow citizens with different perspectives, worthy of respect, even in disagreement. She thought of the countless interviews she had navigated over her career, the subtle and not-so-subtle attempts to extract controversial statements, to generate headlines at her expense, to transform her from an artist into a talking point in the endless content cycle of modern media. She had watched other artists fall into these traps, had seen careers derailed by single statements taken out of context, amplified beyond, reason transformed into weapons. In culture wars that seemed designed to destroy the very possibility of finding common ground. She had watched too as some artists leaned into this dynamic, embracing division as a marketing strategy, converting controversy into clicks, engagement, followers. A currency that seemed increasingly valuable in an industry driven by algorithms that rewarded outrage above all else. In the quiet of her own thoughts, Carrie felt neither judgment nor superiority toward those who made different choices, who used their platforms differently, who felt called to specific advocacy that aligned with their personal convictions. She respected their decisions, their courage, their willingness to accept the consequences of speaking out on divisive issues. But she had made a different choice, one that felt authentic to her own values, her own understanding of what her music was for, what her platform could uniquely contribute in a culture already overflowing with divisive political commentary. This choice wasn't made from fear or calculation, as critics sometimes suggested, but from deep conviction about where her voice could add the most meaningful value. In the control room, Daniel Hughes watched the slight pause before Carrie spoke, interpreting it as hesitation, as uncertainty, perhaps as the first crack in her composed exterior. He leaned forward, anticipating the emotional response they had been pursuing, the moment when her careful navigation might finally falter, might reveal the reaction they needed for their viral clip. But what he couldn't see, couldn't know, was that Carrie's brief silence wasn't hesitation, wasn't uncertainty. It was centering, it was choosing. It was the quiet determination to respond, not from reactive emotion, but from authentic conviction, not as the character Morning Beat wanted her to play in their performative conflict, but as herself, with all the clarity and purpose that defined her, on set, Alicia mistook the pause as well, saw it as an opening, a vulnerability, a chance to press harder, to push further, to finally extract the response the segment had been designed to provoke. She prepared to interrupt, to redirect, to employ the techniques that had served her through countless interviews with resistant subjects. But before she could, Carrie's expression shifted, not toward defensiveness or anger, but toward a quiet certainty, a clarity that suggested she had found exactly the words she wanted to share, not the words that fit Alicia's narrative, not the political declaration the show was fishing for, but something entirely different, something that would address not just the question that had been asked, but the entire framework that shaped this conversation and all the conversations like it that dominated public discourse. The studio audience sensed it too, the subtle shift in energy, the feeling that something authentic was about to break through the manufactured tension of the interview format, something worth hearing, something that mattered beyond the performative conflict they had been led to expect. The cameras adjusted focus, capturing Carrie's expression as it transformed from the pleasant neutrality of media training to something more genuine, more purposeful, creating a visual record of the moment when this conversation became something other than what the producers had planned, a moment that would resonate with viewers long after the segment had ended, long after the day's news cycle had moved on to its next manufactured controversy, a moment of clarity in a media landscape increasingly dominated by noise. Alicia Kent sensed the interview slipping away, the viral moment she needed evaporating before it could be captured, time to change tactics, to escalate, to force the response they had planned for. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, taking on the sympathetic concern she reserved for moments when she wanted to appear compassionate while delivering her most pointed questions. "I understand your desire to bring people together," she said, her voice softening deliberately, a strategic shift in tone designed to disarm, to create false security before the real attack. "But many of your female fans, in particular, are concerned about your silence on issues directly affecting their lives." The pivot was skillful, practiced, moving from abstract discussions of responsibility to implied criticism from Carrie's own fan base, personalizing the pressure, making it harder to dismiss without appearing dismissive of the very people who supported her career. In the control room, Hughes nodded with approval. "Good angle," he murmured, eyes fixed on the monitors. "Let's see if she defends herself." The camera operators adjusted focus, capturing Carrie's reaction in close frame, ready for the shift in expression, the defensive response, the emotional reaction that would give them the clip they needed. The studio audience leaned forward slightly, sensing the increased tension, the escalation of pressure, the building toward what they had been primed to expect, a confrontational moment, a clash between interviewer and subject, the kind of exchange that drove ratings and generated social media buzz. "We've received messages from women who have attended your concerts for years," Alicia continued, pressing the advantage she believed she had created, "who feel disappointed that someone with your platform hasn't spoken out about reproductive rights, about equal pay, about the issues that impact them daily." She let the accusation hang in the air, the implication clear, that Carrie's silence was a form of betrayal, a failure to support the women who supported her. It was a calculated escalation designed to provoke, to create emotional response, to make the conversation personal in ways that would be difficult to navigate without revealing something usable, something clippable, something controversial. The floor manager signaled to the audio team, ensuring levels were perfect, capturing every nuance of the exchange that was unfolding. The increasingly aggressive questioning, the response they anticipated would follow. This was the moment the show had been building toward, the confrontation they had promised in promotional materials and network teasers, the promised drama about to deliver. Only an experienced observer might have noticed the subtle signals that suggested this approach wasn't working as intended. The slight tightening around Alicia's eyes, the barely perceptible tension in her posture, tells that communicated her growing frustration with a guest who refused to engage on the terms that had been established, who understood the game being played and declined to follow its rules. "Just last week, Taylor Swift spoke out about voting rights," Alicia pressed, adding another layer of implied criticism, another famous artist to contrast, another suggestion that Carrie's silence represented failure rather than choice. "Lady Gaga has been vocal about mental health, Beyoncé about racial justice. The list wasn't random, the examples chosen specifically to suggest that true artists, true women, true role models took clear public positions on controversial issues. That silence itself was a form of complicity. The accusation didn't need to be stated directly. It was embedded in the framing, in the examples, in the very structure of the questions being asked. A member of your own industry, Jennifer Nettles, has criticized the country music establishment for its silence on social issues. Alicia continued, building her case, her tone now openly challenging, suggesting that even within Carrie's own genre, her approach was increasingly viewed as inadequate. The pressure was mounting, the accusations piling up, the demand for response growing more insistent, more difficult to deflect without appearing evasive. The trap closing from multiple directions at once. In the control room, Hughes leaned forward, eyes locked on the monitors, watching for any change in Carrie's expression, any micro-reaction that might suggest they had finally found the pressure point that would break through her composed exterior and deliver the emotional response they needed. "What do you say to these women?" Alicia asked. Her tone suggesting this question, above all others, demanded a clear, direct answer. Not nuance, not reflection, but the political declaration they had been pursuing since the segment began. The camera zoomed tighter on Carrie's face, capturing her expression in the close frame, waiting for the defensive response, the momentary flash of anger or frustration, the break in composure that would generate the viral clip they needed. The studio had fallen completely silent. The audience, the crew, the production team, all focused entirely on what would happen next. The tension palpable, the anticipation electric as everyone present waited for Carrie's response to this direct, challenging, personal question. But what happened next wasn't what anyone had expected. Wasn't the defensive reaction, wasn't the political statement, wasn't the emotional outburst that would drive engagement across social media platforms and news cycles. Carrie's expression didn't harden, didn't tighten, didn't reveal anger or defensiveness or discomfort. Instead, something else entirely happened, something that caught Alicia completely off guard, something that would fundamentally shift the dynamic of the entire interview. Carrie smiled, not the practice smile of media training, not the tight smile of someone controlling anger, but the genuine smile of someone who recognized exactly what was happening and found it not offensive, but almost endearing in its transparency. "I appreciate your concern for my fans, Alicia," she said, her voice warm, genuine, without a trace of the defensiveness the question had been designed to provoke. "But I think we should give them more credit." The response wasn't what anyone had anticipated, wasn't the beginning of a political declaration, wasn't a defensive justification, but a redirection that challenged the very premise of the question itself. "My fans are intelligent, thoughtful women," she continued, her gaze steady, direct, capable of forming their own political opinions without needing me to tell them what to think. The statement was delivered without edge, without accusation, but its impact was immediately apparent in Alicia's expression, the slight widening of her eyes, the momentary uncertainty as she realized this approach, too, had failed to produce the response they had been pursuing. "But surely they want to know where you stand," Alicia pressed, recovering quickly, her tone taking on an urgency that betrayed her growing frustration. "On issues that affect their lives, their futures." Carrie's expression remained calm, unchanged by the escalating pressure, the implicit accusations, the increasingly direct attempts to provoke a defensive or emotional response. "I believe my fans know exactly who I am," she replied, her voice still conversational, still warm. "Through my music, my actions, my life, not through political statements or social media posts." The response was substantive, thoughtful, engaging with the question, while once again redirecting from the divisive framing that had been offered. In the control room, Hughes exhaled slowly, recognizing that this approach, too, had failed to generate the moment they needed. "We need to go bigger," he decided, speaking urgently into his headset. Directly question why she won't speak out, frame it as fear, as calculation. See if that provokes a response. On set, Alicia received the direction, her hand brushing her ear in that practiced gesture that disguised communication as casual movement. She nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the instruction without breaking the conversational flow. "Some might suggest," she said, her tone taking on the edge of challenge that had become her signature in viral moments. That your silence isn't about bringing people together, but about protecting your career, about avoiding the backlash that comes with taking clear positions on controversial issues. The accusation was direct, unmistakable, designed to question not just Carrie's choices, but her motives, her courage, her authenticity, the very qualities that defined her public persona. It was the kind of statement that had provoked defensive responses from countless guests before, that had created the emotional reactions, the confrontational exchanges that drove ratings and generated the clips, promotions, headlines that fueled the show's success. The camera operators zoomed tighter still, capturing every nuance of Carrie's expression, every micro-reaction that might reveal the impact of this direct challenge to her integrity, to her courage, to her authenticity as an artist. The studio audience held their collective breath, sensing that the interview had reached its most confrontational moment, the point where even the most composed guest might respond from emotion rather than calculation, creating the dramatic exchange they had been promised. What happened next would not only surprise Alicia, but would fundamentally transform the entire dynamic of the interview, exposing the machinery behind the performance while offering something far more valuable than the manufactured conflict they had been trying to create. "That's an interesting perspective, Alicia," Carrie said, her voice carrying neither offense nor anger, just genuine curiosity, as though examining an unusual specimen under glass. "I wonder, though, if we're asking the wrong question entirely." Her response wasn't defensive, wasn't reactive, wasn't the emotional outburst the show had been fishing for. It was something entirely different, something that shifted the entire framework of the conversation that had been unfolding. The studio fell completely silent. Even the usual subtle movements of the crew, the shuffling of the audience, the whispered directions from producers, all momentarily suspended, as everyone present sensed that something unexpected was happening, something unscripted, something that deviated from the familiar pattern of confrontational celebrity interviews. "Have you considered," Carrie continued, her eyes meeting Alicia's directly, "that constantly demanding artists take political positions might actually be dividing us further rather than bringing us together?" The question wasn't accusatory, wasn't hostile, but it contained a clarity, a directness that immediately transformed the dynamic between them. Alicia blinked, momentarily taken aback by this reversal of roles, this unexpected shift from defensive subject to thoughtful questioner, from reactive guest to active participant directing the conversation, rather than merely responding to it. In the control room, Hughes leaned forward. "What is she doing?" he murmured more to himself than his assistant. "She's turning the whole thing around." On set, Alicia attempted to regain control, to redirect, to re-establish the narrative framework they had carefully constructed. "We're simply asking for transparency," she said, her tone taking on the reasonable patience she employed when establishing moral high ground. "Your fans deserve to know your positions on issues that matter to them." The recovery was practiced, professional, a pivot back to the ethical framing that had served her through countless interviews, placing the subject on the defensive, making silence itself appear suspect. But Carrie wasn't following the familiar script, wasn't accepting the premise, wasn't allowing herself to be maneuvered back into the position that had been prepared for her. "Do they, though?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious, not confrontational, not dismissive, just sincerely questioning the assumption itself. "Do they really need my political opinions when experts with far more knowledge and insight are already speaking on these issues?" The question challenged not just Alicia's approach, but the entire framework of celebrity political commentary. The expectation that fame conferred not just visibility, but authority on complex social and political questions. "I wonder," Carrie continued, her expression thoughtful, "if we've created a culture where we value the political opinions of celebrities more than experts, where we expect performers to become pundits regardless of their expertise or knowledge." The observation wasn't delivered as attack, wasn't framed as criticism of Alicia personally or Morning Beat specifically, but as a broader reflection on media culture itself, on the expectations that shape these interviews, these confrontations, these manufactured moments. A camera operator adjusted focus, capturing both women in frame, creating visual record of the shifting dynamic between them. Alicia's growing tension, Carrie's unchanged calm, a contrast that communicated more clearly than words. The fundamental difference in their approaches to this conversation and perhaps to public discourse itself. "I think what your fans really want from me," Carrie said, her voice taking on a new warmth, a new certainty that seemed to expand, filling the studio with unexpected authenticity, "is exactly what I've always given them. Music that speaks to their lives, their experiences, their emotions, their hopes, their struggles, connection that transcends the divisions that dominate everything else." The response redirected the conversation entirely, moving from the political framework Alicia had established to something more fundamental, more meaningful, challenging not the specific questions that had been asked, but the entire premise underlying the interview, "I believe," Carrie continued, "that my responsibility as an artist isn't to tell people what to think politically. It's to create spaces where we remember what we share as human beings beyond the labels and divisions that seem to define everything else." The statement wasn't defensive, wasn't reactive, it was affirmative, positive, an assertion of a different understanding of artistic purpose, of celebrity responsibility, of public discourse itself. The audience's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a collective leaning forward, a quiet attentiveness that communicated more clearly than applause that something authentic was breaking through the manufactured tension of the interview format. Something worth hearing, something that resonated in a way that performative conflict never could. Alicia sensed the shift immediately, recognized that the audience was responding not to the confrontation she had been trying to create, but to the substance Carrie was offering instead. Her experienced instincts warning her that the segment was moving rapidly in a direction they hadn't anticipated, away from the viral moment they had planned, towards something altogether different. "But don't you think," she pressed, making one final attempt to redirect, to re-establish the confrontational framing, "that staying silent on these issues when you have such influence is itself a privilege, a luxury that many don't have?" The question contained multiple traps, multiple implied accusations designed to force Carrie into either accepting the premise and appearing complicit or rejecting it and appearing defensive. It was the kind of question that had generated the viral moments that defined Morning Beat, that had created Alicia's reputation as an interviewer celebrities feared facing, but Carrie's expression remained unchanged, not defensive, not provoked, just thoughtfully considering the perspective offered, the way she might consider an interesting melody or an unusual lyrical phrase. "There's a difference, Alicia," she said finally, her voice carrying neither offense nor condescension, just the clarity of someone speaking from authentic conviction rather than calculation. Between silence and selectivity, the statement was simple, direct, precise, cutting to the heart of the distinction that Alicia's framing had deliberately obscured. "I'm not silent about my values," she continued. "My faith, my family, my commitment to treating people with dignity and respect. The issues I work on privately through my foundation, supporting education, clean water, animal welfare." Her hands opened slightly in a gesture that encompassed these commitments, these expressions of her values in action. "What I've chosen," she said, "is to be selective about allowing myself to be used as a political symbol in debates where my voice adds neither expertise nor meaningful perspective. Just another celebrity opinion in a landscape already crowded with them." The response wasn't what anyone had expected, wasn't the defensive reaction to accusations of privilege, wasn't the political declaration that would generate headlines, wasn't the emotional moment that would drive engagement. It was something else entirely, something thoughtful, substantive, authentic, that challenged not just Alicia's question, but the entire framework of performative conflict that shaped these interviews. In the control room, Hughes recognized immediately what was happening. "This isn't working," he said urgently, speaking into his headset. "She's completely reframing the entire conversation. We need to end this and go to commercial." It was a rare admission of defeat, a recognition that the segment they had planned, the viral moment they had pursued, was not going to materialize, that continuing the interview would only strengthen the alternative narrative Carrie was establishing, one that exposed their own tactics, their own approach more clearly with each exchange. On set, Alicia received the message, touching her earpiece in that practiced gesture that disguised communication as casual movement. She nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the instruction, preparing to wrap the segment, to transition to commercial, to salvage what they could from an interview that had veered dramatically from its intended course. But before she could speak, before she could execute the practiced pivot that would allow them graceful exit. Carrie continued, her voice taking on a new warmth, a new certainty that commanded attention. "I think we're living in a time where we've confused performance with substance," she said, her gaze direct but not confrontational, "where we value strong statements over thoughtful action, where we expect everyone to instantly take sides on complex issues that might actually require nuance, empathy, and careful consideration." The observation cut to the heart of contemporary discourse, to the performative outrage, the manufactured conflict, the binary thinking that dominated media landscapes, challenging not just Alicia's approach to this interview, but an entire culture of communication that prioritized division over understanding, engagement over enlightenment. But what struck everyone present, what would become apparent to viewers at home, was not just the substance of Carrie's words, but the complete absence of anger or defensiveness in how she delivered them. She wasn't attacking Alicia, wasn't condemning Morning Beat, wasn't positioning herself as morally superior. She was simply offering an alternative vision of how public figures might engage with complex issues, how artists might understand their responsibilities, how meaningful dialogue might actually occur. And, in doing so, she was demonstrating precisely the approach she was describing. Thoughtful, measured, focused on connection rather than division, on substance rather than performance. The contrast with the confrontational framing that had shaped the entire interview could not have been more stark or more powerful. In that moment, the dynamic had completely reversed, the interviewer becoming the subject of examination, the questions themselves becoming the focus of inquiry, the entire framework of the segment exposed, not through angry accusation, but through calm, authentic alternative. And what happened next would transform not just this interview, but potentially the understanding of everyone watching about what meaningful public discourse actually required.